Daf Lamed Beis in Beitsa. We started a Mishnah in the middle of the page that talks about the prohibition of making kalim on Yom Tov. Of course, even on Shabbos it's asur, but perhaps on Yom Tov we would have thought for different reasons we'd be allowed some type of heter vochel nefesh. Says the Mishnah, no. And then we get into the Gemora, we see that it's really a bigger chiddush than we thought, because these kalim that we're talking about are very rudimentary, are very basic kind of kalim that you might have thought aren't even considered kalim at all. A piece of clay that all you did was push your hand into it to create a receptacle. Or we have the case of the wood chips that become charcoal. And the last case was a wick being cut into proper segments. All those cases are a bit of a chiddush to say that it's called making a kli. You see in Rashi and the Mishnah he emphasizes, yes, these are also called kli and have the isra of tikkun kli. But also, because we're going to see in the Gemora, these things are, some of them are machlokis. For example, the clay, if you have to put it into a kiln, to fire it up in a furnace, to dry it, to harden it, to purify it, for it to become considered a kli or not, that's a machlokis. We see in the Beitsa between Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Meir. And the Gemora asserts that our Mishnah is going like Rabbi Meir, that it is considered a kli, and that's according to the first version, the chiddush of our Mishnah. We paskin like Rabbi Meir, that even just putting a receptacle in a piece of clay, making it a receptacle by pushing down into it your fingers so that it becomes a concave piece of clay, even that's considered making a kli that our Mishnah prohibits, and that in the case of Tuma, Rabbi Meir asserts it would be makabel Tuma as well. Now we have an Ika Amri that the whole discussion about who wrote our Mishnah followed a slightly different path according to this second version, but something still along the lines of the question of at what point do you consider a ceramic kli that's made out of clay a kli, proper vessel, proper finished product. Okay, so shall we start with the Ikeda Amri, or should we do a review first of the whole Gemora?
Let's do a review of the whole Gemora.
Okay, you're voting for review. What do you say, Shabbatai?
Well, I'm happy with the first part.
Up to the Ikeda Amri?
Yeah.
Okay, perhaps let's start from the Ikeda Amri then, and if we have time we'll go back and review the whole sugya.
You can stay with it?
Yeah, it's my focus between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shua. What point does it get uncertain?
Right. And each nafkamina, our Mishnah, the nafkamina is, can you make it on Yom Tov? If it's a finished product, then you can't, like the Mishnah says, because you made a kli. And if it's not a finished product, you could do it. It sounds like from the way the Gemora is speaking, that because it's not really considered yet a kli. So according to that pshat, Rabbi Meir would say it's asur to take the clay and to create a small receptacle within it. And according to Rabbi Yeshua, that would be mutter on Yom Tov, apparently. And then Abai in the middle tried to argue, but we basically, answered his question according to the Gemora, but even though we admitted that it might be a bit of a weak answer, it's still an answer the Gemora seems to accept. Okay. So let's try the Ikeda Amri then. Excuse me.
Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi So, some say, there's another version, right?
Of the whole discussion, which looks like the reason why it's an Ikeda Amri is because we had the same kind of question: who wrote the Mishnah? You have Rav Yosef giving a certain answer and Abaye questioning that answer. So it follows a similar pattern to the first version, just the details, some of the details have been changed, so to speak, are different. This time it's Rav Yosef still saying that I know who wrote the Mishnah, but he's going to give a slightly different slant according to this version. Who is the author of our Mishnah according to Rav Yosef? Right. And we haven't yet seen his opinion, but then we bring his opinion that what?
Is that a Mishnah?
Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Meseches Idiyus.
Fisin, Cholomios, Torah, or So these plates that are made for village plates, remain tamor in the tent of where there's a corpse, where there's a person.
Right. Do you remember why Rashi explained that to be true? What was unique about this kli that makes it not makabel tumas meis?
Flat.
Since it has no receptacle, there's a diuk. Rashi brings a pasuk where we have a diuk that in order to be makabel tumas meis, the kli has to have a receptacle.
So these klis don't have a receptacle.
It's like a flat plate. Just like a large slab of clay.
That's the Tsama
Tameot.
the Tameot, the Masa Hazav, if they become Tamei, if they carry by a Zav.
Right, we said carry could be one version of masa, but masa is really even through an indirect raising up of an object. Like, for example, the seesaw. You sit on one end of the long board and the other end goes up, which who would put a cup on a seesaw, but it can happen in a more simple way that a lot of times you sit on a long bench and you sit down on one end, the other end does go up a tiny bit. Not like a seesaw, but a few centimeters. It just wasn't made completely flat. So the truth is, anytime your action causes another kli to move up or down, or even it's a little bit masha from Rashi in the Gemora that even just moving it, even if my indirect action causes it to move, that's also called masa. I think it's literally called hesed. But I think apparently it's included in masa. But for sure, if I do anything to cause an object to sort of be raised up, even if it's like on the bench, and it's always sitting on the bench, it never leaves the bench. It's not like when I sat on it, jumped up into the air. Just gradually, when I sat on one end, the other end went up. That's called masa as well. Okay, but so this is the irony that this same kli in one area of halacha is makabel tumah, and the other area of halacha is not makabel tumah. That's kind of the point at this, that the Mishnah is trying to make. Why does it? We said it's not makabel tumas meis because it's not a receptacle. It is a kli. It has a usage. It is a utensil. It has a usage. It's just like this, long and flat, no receptacle. If I pour some water here, it'll just roll off. Okay? So that means there's no receptacle.
This is a kli.
Excuse me?
The bottle is a kli.
The bottle's a kli, but this table is also a kli. It's just a kli that's not a receptacle. Some kalim will have like a pin, a needle. It's a kli, but it's not a receptacle. There's no receptacle within it. That's the point. This plate is like this table, long and flat, with no borders to contain things within them. So anything will just roll right off. So that's the point of this Mishnah that we're now reading. That it's not makabel tumas meis. Why? Because it's not a receptacle. Even if it's a kli, it's not a receptacle. That's the point.
It's like a knife and a fork.
Except knife and a fork are metal. Metal, I think, is makabel tumah anyways. And we're talking now about a ceramic kli, so it depends what it's made out of as well. Wooden kalim have their own halachas as well. Each material that's made with can make a difference of some slight differences in their ability to be makabel tumah. So in this case, we're talking about a ceramic kli. Then we say to be makabel tumas mace is a diuk in the pasuk that it has to have what?
It's a receptacle.
Receptacle. This plate is not a receptacle. It's just a long, flat piece of.
So to be makabel tumah, it has to have a receptacle.
What?
In order for kli to be makabel tumah, it has to
Well,
have
which type of tumah? That's the point.
kli.
What you're saying is right as far as one type of tumah. There's different types of tumah, you know? Like a dead body, a dead human body is one of the most tame things. It's called a viavosa tumah. Okay, but that's the point. There's different halachas. If a person is tame mace, how can he become tahor? Only through paraduma water, 3rd and 7th day, and all of that. Very complicated. If you touch a dead sheretz, he's also tame, but it's a whole different kind of tumah. There it's sufficient just to go to the mikveh and wait for the stars to come out at night. Okay, so there's different types of tumah. And each type of tumah has its own set of halachas. Sometimes they resemble each other. There's like certain common halachas perhaps. But a lot of them are different for the different types of tumah and the different types of objects. So we're saying now, for the type of tumah called tumas mace, to be tummy in an ohel mace specifically, it has to be a receptacle. But if there's a zav, right? We just had that in the parsha, right? In Tazria Matzorah talked about a zav.
Yes.
And women who count 7 clean days is because they think they might be a zav. If it's just a nida, she doesn't have to count 7 clean days. Just goes to the mikveh as soon as she stops bleeding. But our women don't do that because we're worried maybe they're not just a stam nida, maybe they're actually a zav. And a zav or a zava is a much higher level of tumah than a nida. Okay? That's why it has an extra halach of counting 7 clean days and so on and so forth. Okay? But that's what it's talking about here. Zav, a man who had an emission that's not sperm, it's not a keri, it's not a bal keri, it's a higher level of tumah called a zav.
Person is a bal keri chashon.
A bal keri is also tumah, but a very low level of tumah. One of the ways you see the levels of tumah is where is he allowed to go? One type of tumah you're still allowed to go into, let's say, Machane Yisrael. Just not Machane Levia or Machane Shechina. Some levels of tumah you're allowed to go into Machane even Levia, but not Machane Shechina. Right? Some levels you're not allowed to go into even like a Matzorah. Matzorah can't even go in Machane Yisrael until he reaches a certain level of Torah, and then he has a certain procedure. But there's different types of tumah. That's the point. So now we're talking about a zav, okay, and what's called masa of a zav. Masa, we said, means if I press down on the table here, right, now this table's very stable, nothing happened to the bottle when I go like this, but if it was an unstable table that wobbled a bit, and I went like that, the bottle would go up a touch, would move by my. If I was a zav, which I probably am a zav, by the way, in case you wanted to know, right? If women are considered to be a suffix zava, probably men are considered suffix zav. And that's why many men like to go to a mayan, because a zav cannot become tahor in a regular mikveh. A bal keri can. But a zav needs a mayan. That's why some people prefer to go to a mayan, because then you get rid of even on the possibility that you're a zav. In any event, so if we have a fellow who's a zav and he presses down on the table and that plate that we're talking about goes up, right, and it moves, does it become tameh?
It's a machlokes, right?
Well, right now we're in the first part of this new Mishnah in Idios, and what does it say?
Tumas b'masa is on.
What?
Does become tumah.
Read the whole sentence. These ilfasin choranios.
Ilfasin choranios, these rural places.
What?
These mean these plates, right?
They're made out in the villages.
Taharis b'oihel. A mace, a tar in in the oil mace that they're
Even if they're in an oil mace where everything else is tummy, they are not tummy. Right? A man can own a bunch of kalim. Half of them might be tummy, half of them might be tahor. Why are these tahor? We were discussing a moment ago. Why are these tahor?
because it doesn't have a receptacle.
That's right. And Rashi says there's a pasuk in the Chumash that we're medayik that if it's a ceramic vessel, which we're talking about ceramic vessel now, it has to have a receptacle to be tummy in oil mace. It doesn't have a receptacle, it doesn't become tummy. Even if it's a kli. It's not the right kind of kli, so to speak. Okay?
Yeah.
And the other halacha?
Tmeos b'masa zav. But these same plates become tummy if you make a move.
If
Making
a zav
zav.
makes them move by even indirect movement, right? Why is that? I thought we just said that they can't be makabel tumah.
Good question. Don't know.
The answer is because it depends which type of tumah we're talking about. If we're talking about tumas mace and oil of mace, there is a special pasuk in the halachas of oil of mace, in Parashas Para, right? In Parashas Chukas,
Yeah.
where we're medayik that it has to have a receptacle. But as far as the zav is concerned, he can make a tameh even with this indirect kind of a movement. Why? Because it is, in the end of the day,
Of
this kli is a kli. This plate is a kli. And a kli is makabel tumah.
so it doesn't make a difference if it has a receptacle.
That's right. It's still a kli. It's still a kli, regardless of whether it has a receptacle. Just like a needle is a kli, and a nail is a kli, and all these things that don't have a receptacle are still a kli.
Except to wash my face off.
So why Zara is less dramatic, I guess, in like a mace.
Right.
So here it seems to say the opposite.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, if it were all logic, then we could probably have a lot of different halachas. But it's not logic here. We're not dealing with logic. We're dealing with psukim. That's the point. Step one is that we should know it's a kli. So if it's a kli, it should really be makabel any type of tumah. Any time where a kli is makabel tumah, it should be makabel tumah because it is a kli. But you could say it that way, and then you add, but in an oil of mace, it's not makabel tumah because the Torah there says even though it's a kli, and it would be makabel normal types of tumah, it can't be makabel tumah's mace because it's a special requirement in oil of mace that it be a kli that has a receptacle.
Oh, so it's not the degree of tumor that it's exposed to, but it's the different requirements.
It happens to be. It's like a technicality. It's not because it's a higher or lower degree of tumah that has made this new halacha. It's because there's a special wording in the Torah that alerts us that in oil of mace, you could really say it a certain way, which make it more palatable and more, closer to our thought process. Oil of mace is an extremely big kiddush, right? If you say it like that, perhaps it's easier to swallow. Oil of mace is a big kiddush. Why is oil of mace a big kiddush? Let's say because even in the case where I said if I move this and something moves, at least I'm having some direct contact through the movement. I've caused this thing to move. But in oil of mace, there's no real contact there. The mace is over here, and somewhere like could be a mile away if it's a big hall, like a huge wedding hall, right? You have a guy who died, who had a heart attack in one corner, and then, way on the other side, there's a cup still sitting there.
Hospital.
What?
A hospital.
In a hospital. The hospital is also a big problem. That's right. That's why Kohanim can't just walk into a hospital. They always have to worry that somebody died, and the whole thing's a huge oil of mace.
I have a friend who was telling me the other day, it's interesting, that when they flew to London from Europe, he's a Kohen. They had to fly via...
Jordan.
Via Eilat.
Wow.
Because they don't cross over any
Cemeteries.
yeah.
Cemeteries, yeah.
It's really amazing.
Yeah, I know there are people who are very machmir on that. And I think I mentioned the other day, there's a society in America where they actually map it out, where the Kohen have to be careful and so on and so forth. Sometimes it's not even clear. You wouldn't ever think that walking down the street, where there's no necessary tumah there, but
Look, there's a tree or something.
they have many streets that over the trees are so old really and tall, and they arch over the, it almost creates a canopy over the road that continues on, like tree after tree after tree, all the way till the end of the end of the street, and sometimes at the end of the street there's a cemetery.
What's a dead end?
Yeah, and if he lives down under, he's really in trouble.
It's right down
Play very good with puns, eh?
there. I just heard the other day why they bury Arabs 40 foot underground. Just deep down there, actually, nice people.
I don't remember the 40 feet, but remember that you said that joke before.
I was kidding.
Okay, so that's the point, that the Torah has created, certain halachas that are particular to each type, not necessarily because of the degree, but it could be because, again, oil mace is a very big chiddush, so maybe you could look at it like that, because it's such a big chiddush, the Torah has extra requirements for it to really become true. So here there's an extra requirement that it has a receptacle. So that's the point. This kli doesn't have a receptacle, but it is a kli. So regarding oil mesa, there's a special requirement of receptacle. It's not makabel tuma. But regarding a regular tuma, like to be makabel tuma from a zav, even with this indirect type of masa thing, it is still a kli, so it is makabel tuma.
And is the reason that the Gemora is talking about this, the first section is talking about kelim that have been grooved out and finished, or not finished. Whereas here we're talking about flat with a cup or not a cup.
Right.
Not that they finished or unfinished.
That's not really the issue, right? But it is in a way, because it seems that at this point that it doesn't have a rim. It's a plate without a rim. And apparently in those days a plate, even today, I think Rashi even says it's very limited usage, really. You can't, like normal things that tend to ooze, you can't put on this plate. It'll just ooze onto your lap. But a steak, you take a nice thick steak, you can put that on this flat plate that doesn't have a rim, and it won't really affect you necessarily. So it has a limited usage, really. And that's the new approach, is to say our Mishnah's mechadish, that you could take this thing and you could create just the receptacle, and it will be makabel tuma, or it will be a finished product. Let's say for Yom Tov purposes, you can't do it. And then we say, oh, but if it would have been flat, it would have been different. If it wouldn't have had a receptacle, it would have been different. So that's what seems to be the new question. Looking at the Mishnah as mechadish, that to become a kli, it has to have a receptacle. Without that, it wouldn't have been a proper kli. That's what our Mishnah seems to imply.
Whereas the first Mishnah says they all got receptacles, because they have to be finished or unfinished.
Right. Right. So not the first Mishnah. It's the first approach. It's like, how do you look at our Mishnah? Our Mishnah is saying a certain statement. You cannot do this on Yom Tov. You could say, well, because you're making a kli. That's what the Mishnah says. You can't do it because you're making a kli. So there's two, if you look in both directions, there's two implications of that. One implication is that you don't need to go to the next step of putting it in the furnace. It's already a kli now. That was the first version. So who wrote that? Who could have held that? There's another point that's implied in our Mishnah as well. You have to put that receptacle into it for it to become a kli.
Mina. What do they call it? Mina. Mina, they call it. Mem Nun Aleph.
Mana.
Mana.
A mana is a kli.
Yeah.
Just an Aramaic word for kli. So the point being that by our Mishnah saying, don't do this because you make a kli, it implies that if you wouldn't have done that, it wouldn't have been a kli. So there's two parts of our Mishnah. There's like two implications of our Mishnah. It says, don't do this because you create a kli, and one implication is, and you don't need to go to the next step of putting in the furnace, it's already a kli now. Who holds that? Rabbi Meir and not Rabbi Yeshua. But then there's another implication in our Mishnah when it says, don't make this receptacle in the clay because it makes a kli, is implying that if you would have some kind of a ceramic thing without a receptacle, it wouldn't be a kli. That's the other direction. If I go back one step earlier, it wouldn't be a kli. So if you imagine that the case in our Mishnah is like a middle of the road. It's clay with a receptacle. And that's what the Mishnah said. Don't do that. Don't create a receptacle in the clay on Yom Tov. But that piece of clay with the receptacle could have gone one more step and been put in the furnace. It also could have had one step before of not without having a receptacle put in it. But we're talking about the middle case where you have a piece of clay that's not been fired up, but it does have a receptacle. So it has a little bit, but it doesn't have everything. It's like the second step after the first step has been done.
It's all about a middle case.
It's already gotten to the second step. It already has a receptacle. So there's a piece of clay without a receptacle, there's a piece of clay with a receptacle, and then there's putting it in the furnace and creating a proper ceramic kli. There's three possible stages you could aim for. And our Mishnah is saying if you get to the second stage, it's a kli, which implies two things. I don't need to get to step 3 to make it into a kli. 2 is enough. That's like Rebbe Meir. Just a piece of clay without being fired up in the furnace is enough. And it also implies that if I wouldn't have gotten to step 2, if I would have stayed at step 1, piece of clay without a receptacle, it wouldn't have yet become a kli. So the second version is looking at that implication. Our Mishnah is making a statement. You cannot take a piece of clay and create a receptacle. That makes it into a kli. But that implies that if you wouldn't have made it into a receptacle, it wouldn't have been a kli. That means that step 1, clay without being a receptacle is not a kli. Well, that sounds like these big plates that aren't a receptacle, they're just a big flat piece of clay, would not be a kli because they don't have a receptacle. So that's the other version that says that's more so the point of our Mishnah. And therefore, who would have said that? Who holds that? That a piece of clay without being a receptacle is still called a kli. And that's what we see over here. Because the Zav, if he does masa on this plate, he does make it tamei according to the Tanna Kama. Because it's a kli, after all. Doesn't need to be a receptacle, it's a kli. But the other Manda Omer, the next one, Rabbi Elazar bar Beitsa says, no, those plates are not a kli. Rabbi Elazar bar Beitsa Omer.
Tohar is Gemora says that even Tohar with the Zav touches there.
And he explains why.
It's
not a finished product, it's not yet a kli. Why is it not yet a kli?
Because it didn't reach its finished product.
Why? What's it missing?
Receptacle.
That's right. According to him, it's not a receptacle. If you'll add borders, or like a rim around it, you'll add a bit more clay around the edges and make it a receptacle, then he'll call it a kli. He'll be willing to call it a
kli.
That's a kli. That's right. But we're talking about a ceramic, basically piece of clay that does not have a receptacle. It's just a large slab of clay. So we're learning that that's also machlokas tanoim. Is that called a finished product or not? Or does it need a receptacle to be a kli? So Rav Yosef's position is, in the second version, that just like you have a machlokas in this Mishnah, between Rabbi Elazar bar Beitsa and the Tanna Kama, are these plates that aren't receptacles considered kalim at all? And if they're a keli, then they can be makabel tumah from a zav. And if they're not a keli, they're not makabel tumah from a zav. Is that true also in our Mishnah? That our Mishnah is saying you can't create a receptacle in this clay because you make it into a kli. Would that be the same machlokas, Rabbi Elazar bar Beitsa and the Tanna Kama? According to Rabbi Yosef in the second version, yes. That's what it says in our Mishnah. You can't do this on Yom Tov is implying, because that's what makes it into a kli, the receptacle that you just created. But if you wouldn't have done that, you would have left it without the receptacle, it wouldn't have been a kli. That sounds like the Tana Kama, who said it's not makabel, this plate is not makabel to mazav. I'm sorry, like Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Tzadok, who says it's not makabel to mazav. Not like the Tana Kama, the other opposite. The Tana Kama said it is makabel tuma, and therefore he looks at it as a kli, even without a receptacle. Okay.
So he argues on the Tana Kama.
There is a maklokus, Tana Kama and Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Tzadok. Just like the first version had a maklokus in Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yeshua, this version has a maklokus. And these are Mishnayos, or these are Brises. They're not really dependent on the versions of our Gemora, but just the question is our Gemora looking at this as the author of our Mishnah or not? And that depends how you read our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is saying if you put your finger into the clay, you make a kli, and therefore you can't do it on Yom Tov. That sounds like you're saying that it has to have a receptacle to be a kli. But once you do a receptacle, it's a kli. Well, who holds that way? Who holds that a piece of clay without being a receptacle is not a kli? Sounds like Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Tzadok. Where do we see him saying that? By these flat plates.
In the Mishnah Edius.
That's right.
Yes.
And over there, he maintains that even regarding Tumazav, which there's no special pasuk that says it has to have a receptacle, but he's saying it does. Practically speaking, most people won't use it without it being a receptacle. Because it's just a piece of clay. Anything you put on it, it will just roll off. Who would want to do that? So apparently he holds that nothing to do with the fact that the Torah is saying one way or the other. Just practically speaking, no one's going to want to use a plate that the villagers use it. Okay, they're crude, they're primitives, bunch of
Ethiopians.
They're from Rhodesia or something like that. I know, but I switched to saying you could either say it's Ethiopians or you could say they're from Rhodesia.
Ethiopians are different than the Rhodesians.
I'm sure these people in the town where these ilfasim are made are also nice people, but they're apparently a bit crude, right? They don't care about the niceties of a plate having a proper rim around it.
Not cultured people.
Yeah, so apparently that's the maklokas, the tanoim here. One would say, since you see the people use it, okay, not everybody in the world uses it, but I don't need everyone in the world to use it. There's a group of people who use it, that shows that it's a kli and it can be makabel tuma. The other one says, yeah, there's a bunch of Ethiopians over there using it, right? It's not going to show us anything.
Okay, good. In South Africa, Pandokis, the Pandok, the little huts that they use, they make the floor out of cow dung. So that's like an uncultured person. And we wouldn't have, I wouldn't have cow dung in my floor. Yeah, not that I'm not cultured, but even at my level I wouldn't have cow dung.
Right. Well, I guess if you grow up with it, people who grow up in that climate, in that environment, they probably look at it as the norm, and they probably look at us as weird as not having dung floors.
That's right.
And we would say, look, it's just in our community, it's not dung.
Very good. Not a dung thing,
Okay, so let's try to remember we're being filmed here. Okay, so hopefully Matt will edit it.
He understands it.
It's pretty smart. Okay, but who knows? Maybe in Savannah they also do. So. Okay, so we have a maklokas tanoim here, and Rav Yosef again is claiming that one of these two tanoim will be the author of our Mishnah, because our Mishnah, by explaining it in the way it did, implied that if you wouldn't have a receptacle, it wouldn't be a kli. It's only kli because he made a receptacle, implying if he wouldn't have made a receptacle, it's not a kli. Sounds like Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Tzadok, who seems to say this ilfaz is not a kli, and the people use it, doesn't matter, it doesn't have a receptacle, it's not a kli. So not only is it not makabel tuma in all of mace, it's not even makabel tuma from the zav, from the mas of a zav. Okay, let's go on here. So again, in the second version, they might be talking about a different set of Tanoim, but it goes with the same structure of Rav Yosef's claiming that one of these two Tanoim is the author of the Mishnah, and Rabbi is coming along to object to that and saying, it's not necessarily true what you're saying, because you could look at it another way.
But he does say, Migamara Namachoto.
Malachta.
Yeah, so he's talking that word here as well, finished product.
It is similar, there's a similar wording in the two Mishnayos, the Mishnah and the Beitsa, with a similar emphasis on making a Malachta. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. That could be one of the reasons why there was a mix-up in the versions, because they both are relating to this idea of Migmor Balachta. So there's some similarities between the two versions, but there's enough divergence to recognize these as two separate versions in the Gemora. Now, in the second version, where Rav Yosef has claimed that Rabbi Elazar bar Beitsa is the author of our Mishnah. Why? Because he's holding that these plates are not a kli because they don't have a receptacle. That would line up with the opinion in our Mishnah, which implies that if you made a receptacle, it became a kli, implying that if it didn't have a receptacle, it wouldn't be a kli. So it must be Rabbi Elazar bar Beitsa who holds that one. Amarle Abaye, who's reading.
Continue.
Shabbatai, have you read so far?
Yeah, good.
Oh. You want Surli to read now?
I can carry on with it. Amalei by Dilma Adkan, local Mar Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Tzadok, Asham, Eile,
Hassan.
Yeah. Again, the Ella is the important word here because it makes it into like an Eino, long Eino Ella.
So up to here, he only said.
Maybe he only said his opinion up to the point where what?
The that it was able to receive something.
Right. In other words, he's now, and this is again very similar to the first version where Abaye again objected because he said maybe over there it still could receive something, but here it can't. Here we're talking about a kli that's flat. It actually doesn't have a base kibul. It doesn't have a receptacle. So what does he mean it can receive something? So again, because it's so wide and flat, you can put certain things on it, like a piece of meat. You can put a steak on it, it won't fall off. So that's what he's saying. It's a very similar in that respect as well to the first version, because the first version also talked about the fact that if it's a very large one, it will have a function. If it's very small, it may not have a function. So he's saying these plates are very large. Even without being a receptacle, they can still receive something, so to speak. So that gives it some kind of usage. So therefore what? Since therefore what? So then Rabbi Elazar bar Beitsa would say it's still a kli.
But the vice is up to this point, what is it? What can it contain? The shiti, coins, or bits of
So it has the same answer as the first version. Okay, let's see the Rashi's on that. First Rashi. Well, in the Rashi's, yeah, you're right. Ikeda Amri. There's an Ikeda Amri. See it, Shabbatai?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Rabbi Yosef said, Masnisni Tani. Chisas on the mana group. The Mishnah taught that whether chisas is a kli.
When you diminish from the clay and you make a nair by diminishing the clay by pushing your fist into the clay, that makes a mana, right? Our Mishnah that says that makes a mana, that says you can't do it on Yom Tov because it's making a mana. So you see that makes a mana. He's saying what?
It's Rabbi Elazar bar Beitsa here.
That's right. It must be our Mishnah's written by Rabbi Elazar bar Beitsa.
To Amar, he said, Ifnei chakika lav mana hu. Carving something else not considered a kli. אבל חקיקה מסר מרה.
Mashvi.
משהו like mara.
So what's he saying?
Carving something out with a muscle with a
Mashve.
he equates it.
It's like it makes it into, right? If you equate something to be something, it's like you're making it to be that thing. That's the word they use to say it. That makes it into, that equates it to be a kli. Makes it into a kli. So what's he saying? Let's just say in our own words, what's Rashi saying over here? The second version is focusing on what? What Rashi calls the chakika, the carving out process.
Yes.
And he's saying that's what Rabbi Yosef's drawing our attention to. And he's saying that over there, Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Tzadok, what holds a position that what?
Is a kli.
Lifnei chakika.
Lifnei first in Chavarias on the next Rashi.
No, I haven't yet finished with the first Rashi, if you don't mind.
Lifnei chakika lav manahu. Before carving something out, it's all considered a kli.
Right. Like, where do we see that? By these flat plates. Those flat plates have not been carved out. Just flat clay. Flat mud.
Yes.
Right? But if you carve it out, you make a receptacle. So Rashi is focusing on the act of carving it out. Carving it out makes it into kli. Why? Because you create a receptacle.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you need to carve it out to make it a receptacle? According to... Yes, right? That's what Rashi's saying. He's the one who holds that before you do the chakika, I mean, if you don't do chakika, it's not a kli.
If you do chakika,
it is a kli. And he wants to say that will be the author of our Mishnah, because it said pretty much the same thing in our Mishnah. That when did it become a kli? When you did what our Gemora, what our Mishnah calls pechisa. Lessening the clay. How do you lessen the clay? You carve it out. Right? So that's basically the equation he's making. Okay?
Yeah.
Go on. Next Rashi. Shabbatai, you want to try the next Rashi?
Which one?
Ilfasin charonios.
Ilfasin charonios. These flat plates. Mefaresh lakama. They're going to be explained later. Taurot, plate show B'nai Erios. These are plates for the people that live in these villages. Sha'inam B'nai Karkis.
Krachim Gedolim.
No, they're not members of a large
metropolis.
Yeah, city. The aim
Makpidim.
They're not makpid. They're not careful.
They don't really care.
Yeah.
What of
clean,
kalim noim?
Pleasant,
nice, fancy kalim, right? They're the crude, primitive types. Lives out in huts, the dung floors, right? And they don't care. They don't care if it doesn't look pretty. And therefore, according to them, Misha.
Misha Nifshata. What is that? Straightens.
Right, so like as soon, Misha means from the time that, meaning as soon as it gets straightened out, what gets straightened out? The ka'ara, the plate. As soon as they take that clay and they just straighten it out, they flatten out a piece of clay and they make it into, right, something called cheres.
Ochling by basar. You can eat meat on it.
Right, and that's something you could put on a flat plate and it won't fall off, a big piece of meat. And for them, that's enough, right? For them, that's already like a nice wedding gift, you know. Steak plates.
They eat the cows that made the dough.
Right.
Meat, tninin,
Ain. The ain.
Of ain, and they don't wait. עד שתתחקק וצריך
Titzaref.
תשבר כי בשם. They don't wait until it's carved or burnt in an oven.
Right, there's two steps missing, in other words. Like we said, there's step one where it's just a flat piece of clay. Step two, it gets carved out. Step three, you put in the kivshan. So Rashi's saying these guys are so primitive, these Ethiopians, that they'll eat off these plates even though they're missing two major steps. No chakika and no kivshan. But they're as happy as can be, because they have a nice flat plate to eat their steak on. Right?
Don't know about Ethiopians.
There's no mistake.
Bushmen.
So, Rashi's pointing out that there are people in the world who do use it. So the Tanakama says that's a kli. You know, these people look at it as a kli. It's a kli.
Now this is what Abaya is talking about?
No, this is still in Rav Yosef, that in the second version, he's claiming that the author of our mission is Rabbi Elazar Bar Beitsa. That when we're talking about these plates, he claims that if it's still flat and it's missing chakika, it's not a real kli, it's not makabel tuma. Rav Yosef claimed that that's the author of our Mishnah. That would be just like our Mishnah is saying that the only way you can get it to be a kli is by making a receptacle. But without the receptacle part, if it's just a flat piece of clay, it won't be makabel tuma, and it won't be a finished kli. So Rashi just explained that that is what happens over there, that they take this piece of clay, they just flatten it out without making a receptacle, without putting in the kivshan, and it's already a kli in their eyes. They're very happy to use it at that point. Next Rashi, Sruli.
Taharas b'or hametz. Tahar oil hametz.
So this one everybody agreed on, right? Everybody agreed that these flat plates will not be makabel tum in oil hametz. Why?
L'gabe oil hametz be'inan torch kli cheres. Concerning an oil of the dead, can it be with the dead people or not?
It's oil hametz means a structure where there's a dead body in the structure. And mostly we say that all the kelim in that structure become tamei. Regarding that halacha, that chiddush, that all the kelim in a house become tamei, just because a dead body is somewhere in the house, there's a special requirement. What? Bo'inan, we require, in order for that to be true, that everything becomes tamei, in order for that to work, we require what? There has to be a toch, right? And toch means an internal part of it. An internal part. Internal part is what we call a receptacle. As soon as a receptacle, there's an inside and an outside. Okay? And what Rashi called before chakika, what we call pachisa. So we've been given a lot of names over the last few lines of Gemora. We've given a lot of names, but that's the same idea. So Rashi's saying, in a kli cheres, not every kli, in a kli cheres, to be makabel tum and oil hametz, it has to have a toch, which we would call a receptacle, which has been called chakika and bechisa and whatever you want to call it. But why? Does it mean because it's not a kli? No, not necessarily. It could be a kli. But why is it not makabel tum and oil hametz? Rashi says, exceed, because there's a special what we call gezeres hakasav, we're dictated to by the wording of the Torah. When it describes all the kelim that become tamei, it describes a kli, right? Which is pasuach.
It's open.
It's open. And Rashi says, right, and that's in Midbar Yutes in Parshas Para.
Mashma Yeshiva Pasuk has an opening.
That's right. To talk about it being open, it means there's an opening, right? That's what they call a no-brainer, right? The Torah is saying it's open, that means there is an opening. If there's an opening, that means there's an inside and an outside. That means there's a receptacle.
L'chol tumas maga.
L'chein, l'chol tumas maga. Rashi's mechadish here that everything we're saying now that it has to have a receptacle to become makabel what? Tumas mace is also true by Tumas maga. There's another kind of tum entirely where we have the same requirement, probably because of the same diuk in the pasuk. I assume, unless there's some kind of Yerushalyim or something that we learn from. But it's some kind of pasuk. We see from this Rashi, it's not a svora, it's a pasuk. Okay?
Yeah.
So the Tanakama, who goes nameless, holds that what? These flat plates are what?
Tahar.
They will not be makabel tum and oil mace. Why?
There's no receptacle.
Because of gezerus hakasu. Torah requires that for tumas oil mace to be chal, they have to have a receptacle. Where is the diuk? It says pasuach. Pasuach implies petach. Petach implies there's an inside and outside, so that means there's a receptacle. Okay?
It's just flat, it doesn't have that.
That's right. So now, Rashi goes on to the next part. Even the Tanakama, who says it's not Makabel Tumas Olames, but it is Makabel Tumas Masav Azav. Why?
Azav matame kli cheres.
Azav has the ability, he's Tame, he can be Makabel, Matame, a Kli Cheres, a earthenware vessel. Even Beheset.
With movement.
Just moving it, like we said, I bang on the table and things move, that could be also Tumas Hesed. Okay? And Rashi says, where do we learn this from? We learn it out in what's called Torah's Kohanim, which is just another nickname for Vayikra. What does it say over there? We learn we learn from the pasuk that says, from the pasuk that says, no, I'm trying to explain to you. The mem is like saying we learn from the following pasuk. So now ignore the mem. The kol. Asher yiga bo hazav. Okay.
Any earthenware cleaner which is on the touch.
Right. Now we know in general the word kol is a ribui, right? Because even if it doesn't say the word kol, if it just say kli cheres, I know all kli cheres. What it says kli cheres means any kli cheres. Why does it say v'chol kli cheres? Right? Must be that it's a ribui. Right? It's bringing more into the picture than you would normally say. And we say v'darshinan hasam. We make a drasha over there. Heseto. This is bringing in. In other words, you see from this Rashi that this thing, that if I bang on the table and I move a kli at the other end of the table, that should make it tamei. If I'm a zav, that's a chiddush. I need a pasuk to be mechadish that. The Rashi says there is a ribui for that. The word v'chol. V'chol kli cheres asher yiga bo hazav is telling me that even if he doesn't touch it, right, which is actually very astounding because the Torah says he has to touch it, right? Did you notice that? Kol kli cheres asher yiga bo hazav. It says in the pasuk he has to touch it. And what do Chazal say? No, he doesn't. But it just said in the pasuk yiga. What's the answer?
What does Hesata mean?
Hesed means movement.
Make it move. Hesata means.
Do you hear my question?
Yeah.
How can the Chazal come along and say he doesn't have to touch it when the Torah talks about him touching it?
It's a gezerah.
So you have to say that what the Torah is machadish with the extra word v'chol is that this is also called touching. This is also called touching. I wouldn't have ever thought that on my own. But with the extra drush, with the extra word v'chol, we bring a new thing in, but because that must be the Torah's way of saying this is also I touched it through my influence upon it, right? It's like I affected it. Like touching can be like I was a touching story. I was very touched by it, right? What does touching mean? I was affected by it. So I guess we're saying that when the Torah says touch, this is also included in touching, not physical touching, but in causality. Okay, anyhow, so Rashi says, so therefore we know that the Zav has a power to be matame things even just by causing their movement, right? Which our Gemora calls masa. Because that's the normal way that you cause movement, is by making something move upwards. And then Rashi says, the kivan mitame me'avroi, since. This is interesting Rashi.
So where is it? Where is this Rashi?
At the end of that line, the kivan. You see where the word vayikra tesvav is in parentheses. Then he says v'darshinan zehaseto. It's the fifth wide line of Rashi, towards the end.
Right.
The kivan de mitamele hasit. Since we know through this extra drasha that a zav has a power to be matame akli through what? Hesit. Now what is Hesit? Moving it indirectly from afar. That Rashi says that is what? Me'avroi. From Avroi. Avroi is... No. That's in Hebrew. Avar with in Hebrew, you're right, would mean the limb. This is like the word bar. Right? Brisa. You know what the Brisa, why we call something a Brisa instead of a Mishnah?
It's like an exception, right?
No, it was left out. Outtake. The word bar in Aramaic means outside.
Bar means from outside, right?
That's what he's trying to say. From the outside. From their outside. So he's saying, I don't need a toch, because if I needed a toch, I'd need to go right up and touch it in the inside, but I don't need to actually touch it. I just need to affect it. That's even from the outside. So you see, it doesn't need to have that's what he's trying to prove. He's trying to say that we know that it doesn't need to have a receptacle. I think that's what he's trying to say. Because of that, we know that what? Lo boy toch. It's interesting, because by Tumas Mace, we say it's not Makabel Tuma, because we have a special pasuk that teaches us that it has to have a receptacle. Here he's trying to say, but here it doesn't need a receptacle, we have a special limud for that. Each one gets its own limud, which sometimes you don't always say that. You say, look, if you want to tell you it has to have a receptacle, I need a limud. The other one I learned by myself, just because it doesn't have a pasuk telling you do need a receptacle. So then I know if the other one doesn't have a limud, you don't need a receptacle. But I say no. Once you know that Tumas Mace, you need a receptacle, I need another pasuk by Tumas Zav that it doesn't need a receptacle. Very interesting. So that's what Rashi's worked so hard to show us now, that in Tumas Zav, even if it's just a kli without being a receptacle, it can be makabel tuma from the Zav. Because by definition, that's what Hesed is, Rashi said. Touching it from the outside, so to speak. The Kasavar Tanakama, now he's getting into the actual Maklokas Tanakama versus Reb Elazar bar Tzadok. What is there at Maklokas about these flat plates? Tanakama holds. Cleaning. They are kalim. These are kalim, right? These flat plates that the primitive Aborigines use in the dung floors to eat their steak gnu's, or whatever, are kalim. Why? Hoel kamos shehem. Since they use them, these Aborigines use these plates. Kamos shehem. It's like saying kamo shehem. Just like they are. In other words, without any frills, like Rashi said before. They don't need any frills. They don't need a hakika, they don't need a this. They're very easy people to please. You just give them a steak and a flat plate, and they're already very happy, right? Just like in Australia. You give a guy a beer, that's it. He's happy. These guys...
Six-pack.
These guys give them a flat plate and a steak, and they're happy, right? They don't need anything more. They use it exactly as it is. So that's what Rashi says. That's why the Tanakama says these are kalim. Look at those people; they're using them without any gripes. Hilkach. Therefore, they're makabel tumah, because they are for sure, according to the Tanakama, what? Kalim. How does he know they're Kalim? Because people use them. That's the definition of a Kli. People use it. They have a usage.
Something which is fitting to become tummy.
Right. Obviously, there has to be something that's makabel that can be matama then. Not everything is makabel is matame, right? So it has to be something that has the koach to be matama. But once it does have the koach to be matama, this will become makabel tuma because it is a kli. That's Rashi's point. And the whole reason why they're a kli, so Rashi at the beginning had to tell you because we have no requirement of receptacle. Once I've showed you that, we have to get back to the main idea. The main idea is that even without being a receptacle, they are still a kli, because the proof is in the pudding. They use them. That's what Rashi's saying. They use them as they are. They don't need the next two steps, chakika and kivshar. They don't care about that.
We read that before, no?
No, Rashi's explained that before. Rashi explained it originally when he was talking about why ilfasin are such different things, because these are weird plates that way out in the wetback. They use it without the outback. They use it without any frills. Now he's getting back to the main point that is the main point of the Tana Kaman and Reb Elazar Bar Tzadok. Does that make a difference or not? The fact that the Aborigines in the outback use it on their dung floors. Okay, let's go on. Reb Elazar Omer means Reb Elazar Bar Tzadok Omer. Shum.
Shum. They don't have. They have something.
No. Ein lehem shum tuma.
They don't have anything.
They don't have any tuma. Ein lehem shum tuma.
The love kli ninihu.
Right. These aren't a kli. What are you talking about? Because the Aborigines use them. They don't care. We don't use them as our yardstick of. Right. These guys are too backward. L'fishal enigma malachtan.
Yeah.
They're not a finished product. And if something's not a finished product, you don't consider it a kli. And what is the finished product, the finished work that it needs? Right. That carving out, which is Rashi alluded to before. No, so therefore these things that don't have any chakika, they're not a kli according to Reb Elazar Bar Tzadok. But, behold, meaning a diuk in Reb Elazar Bar Tzadok is that if you would have moved the envelope one more step, nechkaku, you would have, yes, carved them out, then metamuns, then they would, right? So Reb Elazar Bar Tzadok is very simple. Not carved out, they're not a kli, and not makabel tuma. Go ahead and carve them out, then they're a kli, and they're makabel tuma. And Rashi says, now that we know that that's what they're arguing in, they're arguing in these special plates that don't have a receptacle, they don't have what we call a base kibul, they're not carved out, and Tanakama says they're still a kli because people really use them, and Reb Elazar Bar Tzadok they're not because they need to have one more step of the chakika. And Rashi says, Mide aflug, from the fact that they argued be'ilfasin in these special plates, these flat plates, Alma. So we see Mashvi lehu man. There's that word mashvi again.
Yeah.
What makes it into a kli? What has the ability to make it into a kli? The chakika. That is a special act that makes it into a kli. So Rashi says, and that is what Rav Yosef is trying to say, is the hallmark of our Mishnah. That's what our Mishnah is saying. If you make a receptacle in this clay, then it's making it into a kli, and that's Asur on Yom Tov. Says Rav Yosef, that's got to be Reb Elazar Bar Tzadok. He's the one who kept harping on chakika and saying you need to make a base kibul through doing chakika to make it into a kli. And therefore he must be the author of our Mishnah. Came along Rabbi Abaye and say, no, maybe that's not true. Maybe it's only over there where those big plates were still chazi lekabula, even without the chakika, Oh no, with the chakika. That's what he's saying, according to Rashi. When are those plates possible to accept? Mishe nechkeku. This is the interesting Rashi. Rashi says that Abaye's claim is maybe Rebbe Lazar Bar Tzaddik would only call it a kli once you do carve out those plates. He's willing to call it a kli. Only over there, those big plates, and once you carve them out, then he's willing to call it a kli. But mihu, however, kodim chakika lo. But before you actually carve it out, he's not willing to call it a kli, the sofan lichakek. Because at the end of the day, we assume people are going to carve out a receptacle in it. Okay, we'll stop here.